The night she spoke her first word, his empire started collapsing in real time. Amina Chidi had learned long ago that silence was a weapon. In the sprawling Gangnam penthouse overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, she moved like a shadow, careful, calculated, invisible. Her husband, Kang Joon-seo, preferred it that way. A mute African bride made excellent optics for a billionaire trying to scrub blood money clean. But optics, like empires, were built on lies. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection barely visible against the city lights. Outside, Seoul pulsed with neon and ambition. Inside, she was a ghost in silk scarves and oversized coats, carrying her notebook like a shield. The pen tucked behind her ear had recorded more confessions than any courtroom. Tonight would be no different. Mrs. Kang. The voice came from behind her, sharp, perfunctory. Joon-seo's assistant, a man whose name she'd never bothered to learn, gestured toward the elevator. The car is waiting. Amina turned slowly, her fingers tapping once against her notebook, a signal only she understood. I hear you. I understand more than you think. The charity dinner at the Schill Hotel was exactly what she expected. Crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes catching light like diamonds, and Korea's elite pretending their wealth had clean origins. Amina sat beside Joon-seo at the head table, her expression carefully neutral as cameras flashed. The photographers loved her, the silent bride from Africa, so beautifully tragic, so perfectly powerless. If only they knew. Joon-seo's hand rested on her shoulder, a gesture that looked protective but felt like ownership. He leaned close, his cologne expensive and suffocating. Smile, he whispered in Korean, assuming she didn't understand. You're making me look cruel. She smiled, the kind of smile that had survived border crossings and embassy interrogations, the kind that revealed nothing. And if you're already feeling the weight of what she's carrying, you're exactly where this story needs you. Stay close. There are voices in this silence that deserve to be heard, and I think you'll want to be here when they finally break free. Across the ballroom, she spotted Choi Tae-hyun near the service entrance, dressed in a waiter's uniform that didn't quite fit. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to touch his ear, the signal that meant recording active. The bone conduction device hidden in her silk head wrap hummed to life, imperceptible to everyone but her. Yara Diallo swept past their table, her locks pulled into an elegant bun, her smile diplomatic and deadly. She paused just long enough to air kiss near Amina's cheek. You look radiant tonight, she murmured in French, a language Joon-seo didn't speak. Remember, we're counting on you. Amina's fingers tapped twice. Understood. Proceeding. The dinner dragged on. Speeches about philanthropy from men who'd built fortunes on displacement, toasts to progress from politicians who'd authored deportation orders. Amina's hand moved mechanically, lifting her fork, setting it down, performing the choreography of a woman who existed but didn't matter. Then came the shift. Joon-seo's aide, a younger man with nervous hands and too much soju in his system, stumbled toward their table, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice Amina. People rarely did. He collapsed into the empty chair beside her, his voice slurred but clear. No, listen. It's handled, he said into the phone, his Korean dialect sloppy with alcohol. The witnesses? They're gone. After the board vote last month, we cleaned out the whole Gurodong facility. No one's talking now. No one's left to talk. The crystal wine glass on the table vibrated slightly from the base of the live band. Amina's heart matched its frequency, low, steady, threatening to shatter. She didn't move, didn't blink, but her fingers found the notebook, and beneath the table, they wrote in the dark. Mass deportation. Gurodong. Post-board vote. Witnesses eliminated. The aide laughed, oblivious. Boss says it's just business. Migrants understand risk, right? They knew what they signed up for. Joon-seo appeared then, his hand clamping down on the younger man's shoulder. You're drunk, he said quietly, his smile never reaching his eyes. Go home. But Amina had already heard enough. The device in her head wrap had captured every word, every laugh, every casual acknowledgement of erasure. In her pocket, her phone buzzed, a message from Yara. Anything? Two options materialized in her mind like parallel futures. Send the recording, let the embassy escalate, watch her cover story crack under the weight of an investigation that would expose her voice, her mission, her brother's precarious visa application still pending in Nairobi, or delete it. Protect the silence that had kept her alive. Let someone else fight battles she couldn't afford to win. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Outside the ballroom windows, Seoul glittered, indifferent, eternal, built on the bones of people whose names no one remembered. Somewhere in that city, her younger brother's face smiled from a visa photo, trusting her to keep him safe. Somewhere else, witnesses who'd spoken truth had already been cleaned out. Amina closed her eyes. When she opened them, the recording was uploading to an encrypted server. Within 3 hours, Yara would have it. Within 3 days, the embassy would escalate it to a special investigator. Within 3 weeks, Amina's carefully constructed silence would become the most dangerous sound in Seoul. But tonight, in a ballroom full of people who thought her powerless, she made a choice. She chose the voice. The penthouse was too quiet when Amina returned. Usually, Joon-seo retreated to his study after events like these. Conference calls with Tokyo, Scotch and Crystal, the performance of power that required no audience. But tonight, he sat in the living room's leather chair, still in his tailored suit, watching the elevator doors open with an expression she'd never seen before. Curiosity, laced with something sharper. "You're home late," he said in Korean, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The car dropped you off 20 minutes after I arrived." Amina kept her face neutral, reaching for her notebook. She wrote quickly. "Stopped for air. Headache from perfume." He didn't look at the notebook. He looked at her. Really looked. The way predators assess whether prey has noticed the trap. "My aide is missing," Joon-seo continued, his voice dangerously soft. "The one who sat beside you at dinner, he didn't come home. His phone is off." A pause. "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior?" Her pulse hammered against her throat, but her hand stayed steady as she wrote. "He seemed drunk. I paid no attention." "Of course." Joon-seo stood, crossing to the bar cart. Ice clinked against glass, a sound too loud in the silence. "Because you pay attention to nothing. You hear nothing. You are nothing but a convenient photograph." He was testing her. The realization slid down her spine like cold water. She kept her eyes down, submissive. The performance she'd perfected over 8 months of this arranged imprisonment. But her mind raced. Had someone seen her upload the file? Had Taehyun's cover been blown? Or worse, had Yara already moved on the intelligence, faster than promised? Joon-seo's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression. A crack in the careful control. "Go to bed," he said, dismissing her with a wave. "We have the foundation photo shoot tomorrow. Wear something that photographs well." Amina bowed slightly and moved toward the hallway, every instinct screaming that she'd just survived something she didn't fully understand. But she'd only made it 3 steps when his voice stopped her. Amina. He'd never used her name before. Always Mrs. Kang or wife or nothing at all. She turned slowly. Joon-seo stood backlit by the city, his face half in shadow. "You're very good at being invisible," he said quietly. "I wonder sometimes if that's training or survival." She held his gaze, careful not to blink, and waited. "Sleep well," he finally said, turning back to the window. Amina didn't breathe normally until she'd locked her bedroom door. The message from Yara arrived at 2:47 a.m. Buzzing against Amina's pillow. "Embassy escalating. Meet tomorrow. Gwanghwamun Station, Platform 3, 11 a.m. Come alone." Amina stared at the screen in the dark, her brother's photo her wallpaper, his gap-toothed smile, his school uniform, his trust that she'd bring him to safety. The recording had been live for less than 6 hours, and already the machinery was moving. Too fast. Everything was happening too fast. Her second phone, the one Taehyun had given her, untraceable, buzzed next. "We need to talk. Now." Usual place. She dressed in the dark, layers of neutral fabric that made her forgettable, and slipped out through the service entrance that the housekeeping staff used. Joon-seo's security team tracked the main elevator, but they'd never thought to monitor the help. Another oversight born from underestimation. The usual place was a 24-hour pojangmacha near Dongdaemun, tucked behind fabric wholesalers where Seoul's invisible people gathered. Migrant workers, night shift laborers, people who'd learned to exist in the margins. Tae-hyun sat in the back corner, his leather jacket zipped high, cap pulled low. He didn't smile when she slid into the seat across from him. "They're setting you up," he said without preamble, sliding a tablet across the table. The screen showed embassy metadata, file origins, IP addresses, transfer logs. Amina's recordings were there, yes, but so were others she'd never made. Timestamps that didn't match, conversations she'd never captured. "Yara's been feeding manufactured evidence into your collection," Taehyun explained, his voice low and urgent. "Half of what's attributed to you is fabricated. When this breaks, you won't be a witness. You'll be the scapegoat." The pojangmacha owner set down 2 bowls of ramyun without comment, steam rising between them like ghosts. "Why?" Amina's hands moved to her notebook, but Taehyun caught her wrist. "Because she's already sold you," he said. "Yara cut a deal with someone, probably Joon-seo's rivals, maybe his own allies. You're leveraged now. The mute bride who was secretly recording her powerful husband? That's a story that controls whoever needs controlling. And if you're starting to see how silence can be twisted into a weapon against the one who wielded it, then you understand why stories like this matter. Stay with us. The truth is about to get louder, and I think you'll want to hear what happens when powerlessness refuses to stay quiet." Amina pulled her hand back, her mind cataloging exits, options, the shrinking space between survival and exposure. "How long have you known?" she wrote. 3 days. I've been trying to extract the real files, separate your recordings from her fabrications, but she's encrypted everything under your credentials." Taehyun's jaw tightened. "There's more. The aide from the dinner, the one who confessed about Gurodong? She waited. Dead. Car accident on the Olympic Expressway at 3 a.m. Single vehicle, no witnesses." His fingers scratched the scar behind his ear, the tell that meant he was withholding something worse. "Amina, they're cleaning house. Anyone connected to that deportation operation is being erased, and your recording is the thread they're following." The ramyun cooled between them, untouched. "You can't meet Yara tomorrow," Taehyun continued. "She'll have you detained the moment you surface. Diplomatic immunity doesn't protect you. It protects her while she feeds you to whoever's paying." Amina's pen moved. "My brother's visa. I know," his voice cracked slightly. "I know what you're risking. But if you walk into that station tomorrow, you won't walk out. Not as yourself." Her phone buzzed again, Joon-seo this time. "Where are you?" Then another. "Your bedroom door is open. The bed is empty. I'm waiting." Tae-hyun saw her screen. "He knows you left." "He's always known," Amina wrote, the words coming fast now. "Or suspected. Tonight was confirmation." "Then why hasn't he moved against you?" She looked up from her notebook, and for the first time, Tae-hyun saw something in her expression that wasn't fear. It was understanding. Cold, calculated understanding. Because she wrote, "He's still deciding if I'm more useful silent or dead." The pojangmacha's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting their faces in alternating shadow and harsh light. Outside, Seoul's pre-dawn streets began to stir. Delivery trucks, early commuters, a city that never stopped consuming its own. "I have a contact," Taehyun said finally. "Former NIS, now freelance. She can extract you and your brother within 72 hours, but you'd have to give her everything. Every recording, every file, testimony against both Yara and Joon-seo. And if I don't, then you play Yara's game tomorrow. Walk into Gwanghwamun. Hope she's bluffing about the setup." He leaned forward. "Or you go back to that penthouse and pretend you never left. Delete everything. Become the mute bride they want you to be. 3 options, all of them traps." Amina's phone buzzed a third time. "I know you can read this. Come home. We need to talk about what you understand." She stood, pulling her coat tight. Tae-hyun grabbed her wrist again. "What are you doing?" Amina looked down at him. This man who'd risked everything to give her visibility in a city designed to keep her invisible. She wrote one last line. "What I've always done. Listening until I know which lie to believe." Then she walked out into the Seoul dawn, heading back to a penthouse where her husband was waiting with questions she couldn't afford to answer. Joon-seo was standing by the window when Amina entered the penthouse, his silhouette sharp against the breaking dawn. He didn't turn around. "I had security check the footage," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "Service elevator. 2:51 a.m. You returned at 5:33, 2 hours and 42 minutes. Now he turned, and his eyes were different, no longer dismissive, but focused with the intensity of a man who just discovered his property had thoughts. "Where does a mute woman go at 3 in the morning?" Amina reached for her notebook, but Joon-seo crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and snatched it from her hands. "No," he said softly. "No more writing. No more performing." He tossed the notebook onto the couch, and for the first time in 8 months, she stood before him completely unarmed. "My legal team received an interesting call 2 hours ago. The Korean African Business Ethics Council, an organization I've never heard of, is requesting documents related to labor practices at our Gurodong facility." He adjusted his cufflinks, left, then right. "The tell sheet cataloged months ago. The facility we closed last month," he continued. "The one that employed 73 migrant workers, all of whom voluntarily resigned and returned home." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Except someone seems to think otherwise. Someone with access to very specific information shared at very specific moments." Amina kept her face blank, but her heart was a drum against her ribs. "So I asked myself," Joon-seo said, circling her slowly, "who was close enough to hear things they shouldn't? Who do people ignore because they assume understanding requires speech?" He stopped directly in front of her. "And then I remembered, you were sitting right next to Min Jun at dinner when he made that phone call." She met his gaze, steady and silent. "The interesting thing about Min Jun," Joon-seo continued, "is that he was driving home when his brakes failed on the Olympic Expressway. Very tragic, very convenient." He tilted his head. "But before he died, his phone pinged a data transfer. Small file, audio format, uploaded to a server that our cybersecurity team traced to a diplomatic IP address." Amina's blood went cold. "Now I know you didn't upload anything," Joon-seo said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Because you're mute. You can't operate recording devices. You barely understand Korean." He reached out and touched her head wrap, silk beneath his fingers. "Unless everything about you is a lie." She didn't flinch, didn't step back. This was the moment she'd prepared for since the day she'd accepted this contract, since the day she'd learned that survival meant becoming whatever the powerful needed you to be, until they didn't need you anymore. "I'm going to ask you a question," Joon-seo said, his hand dropping from her head wrap to her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "And you're going to answer it, one way or another." He paused. "Can you speak?" The penthouse was so quiet she could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. Every second of silence was a choice, every breath a calculation. Joon-seo's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. He finally glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw made his grip on her chin tighten. "My father is calling an emergency board meeting. For this morning. Unscheduled." His eyes snapped back to hers. "What did you do?" Amina's mind raced through possibilities. Yara had moved faster than expected. The fabricated evidence was already in play. Or Taehyun's and I's contact had made a move. Or the penthouse door opened. Yara Diallo swept in, still in last night's elegant dress, her locks now loose around her shoulders. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits, not Korean, not security, embassy protection. "Mrs. Kang," Yara said, her French accent sharp with authority. "You need to come with us. Now." Joon-seo's hand dropped from Amina's face. "This is my home. You have no jurisdiction." "Diplomatic immunity extends to our assets," Yara interrupted smoothly. "And Mrs. Kang has been working under embassy protection for the past 14 months. The marriage was cover for an investigation into human trafficking and forced deportation." She smiled that slow, devastating smile. "You didn't marry a victim, Mr. Kang. You married a witness." The words detonated in the space between them. Joon-seo turned to Amina, and for the first time, She saw something besides arrogance in his expression. She saw fear. "Tell her she's lying," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell her you chose this, that you wanted—" "She can't tell you anything," Yara said, moving to Amina's side. "She's mute, remember? That was the whole point." She placed a hand on Amina's shoulder, possessive, claiming, "We should go. The press conference is in 2 hours." Press conference. The words hit Amina like ice water. This wasn't extraction. This wasn't protection. This was theater. Yara was going to parade her in front of cameras, use her silence as proof of victimhood, weaponize her voicelessness to dismantle Joon-seo's empire, and in doing so, secure her own political ascension. Amina would become exactly what she'd spent her life refusing to be: a symbol without agency, a story told by someone else. And her brother, still waiting in Nairobi, still trusting her, would be leveraged to ensure her cooperation. "No," Amina said. The word dropped into the penthouse like a stone into still water. Everyone froze. Yara's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Excuse me?" Amina turned to face her handler, her mentor, the woman who'd recruited her with promises of justice and had delivered only exploitation. When she spoke again, her voice was clear, unaccented, precise, the voice of someone who'd spent years listening, learning, waiting. "I said no." Amina switched to French, the language Yara thought was their secret. "I'm not going to your press conference. I'm not going to be your performing victim. And I'm especially not going to let you trade my brother's safety for my silence. If you've made it this far, you already know. Some stories don't end with rescue. They end with reclamation. And if that resonates with you, if you believe voices like Amina's deserve to be heard beyond these pixels and screens, then maybe you'll stay for what comes next. We're building something here, and I think you're exactly the kind of person who should be part of it." Yara's expression hardened. "You ungrateful, I gave you everything. Protection, purpose, a way to matter. You gave me a cage with better PR," Amina replied. She pulled the bone conduction device from her head wrap, holding it up. "And you thought I wouldn't notice when you started adding fabricated files to my recordings? When you turned my evidence into your ammunition?" Joon-seo was staring at her like she'd materialized from nothing, his worldview cracking in real time. "I've been listening to everyone," Amina continued, her voice gaining strength, "including you, Yara, including the calls where you promised Joon-seo's rivals that you could deliver his downfall, including the ones where you sold my recordings to 3 different bidders." She switched back to Korean, looking at Joon-seo. "And yes, including every crime your company committed. I heard all of it." "Then you're admitting you're a spy," Joon-seo said, but there was no triumph in his voice. Only the hollow realization of a man who'd been playing the wrong game. "I'm admitting I'm a witness," Amina corrected. "There's a difference. You wanted silence because you thought it meant compliance. She wanted silence because she thought it meant control. She looked between them. But I chose silence because it let me listen. And now I'm choosing to speak." Yara's eyes narrowed. "If you testify against me, your brother is already on a plane." Taehyun's voice cut through the room. He stood in the doorway, phone in hand, cap pushed back. "Landed in Amsterdam 3 hours ago. My NES contact pulled some favors. He's safe, Amina. He's out." The relief nearly buckled her knees, but she forced herself to stay standing. "So here's what's going to happen," Amina said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm going to that press conference, but I'm not going as your puppet, Yara. I'm going as myself. And I'm going to tell the truth about the deportations, about Joon-seo's company, and about diplomatic staff who exploit the people they're supposed to protect." "You'll destroy your own credibility," Yara hissed. "A wife testifying against her husband? A foreign woman accusing a powerful diplomat? No one will believe you." "Maybe," Amina acknowledged, "but they'll hear me. And that's what you both fear most, isn't it?" "Not what I know, what I might say." Joon-seo sank into the nearest chair, his empire crumbling in his mind's eye. Board members calculating distance, investors preparing statements, his father's disappointment already a weight on his shoulders. "I never wanted to destroy you," Amina said to him, surprising herself with the truth of it. I wanted justice for the people you erased. There's a difference, is there? Jun-seo looked up at her, and for a moment he was just a man who'd mistaken control for love, power for safety. You married me knowing what I was. I married you knowing what you'd done, Amina corrected. I didn't know if you could become something different. I still don't know, she paused. But I know I can't become what either of you wanted me to be. She walked toward the door, Tae-hyun falling into step beside her. They'll come after you, Yara called after them. Both sides. You won't survive this. Amina stopped at the threshold, looking back at the penthouse, the gilded cage where she'd performed silence for 8 months. The stage where she'd learned that powerlessness was sometimes the most powerful disguise. I've survived worse, she said. I survived being invisible. Speaking can't be harder than that. 2 hours later, Amina stood at a podium in front of 47 journalists, 8 cameras, and a room full of people who'd expected a victim and found a witness instead. She wore no head wrap, no silk scarves, just her hair in its natural coils, her notebook closed on the podium, her voice clear and unwavering. My name is Amina Chidi, she began, and for the past 14 months I have been documenting systematic human rights violations committed by Korean corporations against African migrant workers. I did this work under diplomatic cover, yes, but I also did it because silence was the only currency anyone offered me, until I realized my voice was worth more. The cameras flashed, the room erupted, and somewhere in Amsterdam, a young man with his sister's eyes watched the live stream on a borrowed laptop, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "You did it. You actually did it." Tae-hyun stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a small smile playing at his lips. Yara Diallo sat in the front row, her expression unreadable, already calculating her next move. Jun-seo watched from his office across the city, his father's emergency board meeting suspended, his legacy rewriting itself in real time. And Amina spoke. She spoke for the 73 workers who'd been cleaned out. She spoke for every person who'd been told their silence was the price of survival. She spoke in Korean and English and French, her voice growing stronger with every sentence, every truth, every refusal to be quiet. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, then another, then a dozen, 2 dozen, until the applause was deafening, not for performance but for presence, for a voice that refused to stay buried. Amina stepped away from the podium and walked out of the press room, Tae-hyun waiting at the door. What happens now, he asked quietly. She looked at him, this man who'd risked everything to help her be heard, and smiled. Now, she said. Now we listen to what the world says back. They walked out into Seoul's afternoon sun, the city sprawling before them. No longer a prison, but a place where her voice had just rewritten the story everyone thought they knew. Behind them, cameras clicked. Ahead, an uncertain future waited. But for the first time since she'd arrived in this country, Amina Chidi was walking toward it, speaking her own truth. And that, she thought, was worth every risk. Stories like Amina's live in the space between silence and sound, between survival and resistance. If her journey found you here, then maybe there are others waiting to be discovered too. Stories of people who refuse to stay quiet, who turn powerlessness into precision. We'll be here telling them if you want to keep listening. Until then, thank you for witnessing what happens when silence finally breaks.